Hi, everyone. Welcome to Inquire Live at Gameday Central, and happy almost New Year alongside EJ Smith. I am Olivia Reiner. We are coming at you live from the Lincoln Financial Field press box, gearing up for the Eagles matchup against the Arizona Cardinals. EJ, how you doing?
I'm doing really well, Olivia. Happy almost New Year. I'm very excited to be covering a 1 o'clock game. It's not super sunny, but the sun is out there somewhere. I'm excited that I'm going to be able to get home and have just a New Year's Eve rager with my dogs. My wife's going to be working, so I'll be by myself. But listen, we're going to have a party. It's going to be good. So doing really well. Excited for the game.
Sounds like an ideal New Year's Eve, and also everyone loves a 1 p.m. start, so no complaints over here on our end. Before we get into our conversation today, just a reminder that you can also be a part of it. If you head over to inquire.com/Eagles Gameday, you can leave us a question, a comment, whatever is on your mind, your heart about this team. We want to hear from you, and we will answer some of your questions and comments toward the end of our show today in a segment we call the fan zone. All right, EJ, we've got a lot of health related, injury related things to discuss today. Let's start with who we know is playing and who is in, and that is namely kind of a big name returning to the lineup today. Nickel cornerback Avonte Maddox is active, and he has been activated and returned from injured reserve for the first time since week 2. So it's been quite a long time since we have seen him out there on the field after he dealt with a pectoral injury for almost the last 3 months. But he is healthy, he's active, he is ready to go. And notably enough, we just received the inactives, and cornerback Bradley Roby, who had been playing in the slot, is inactive today. So I think that is a pretty good indicator that we're going to see a lot of Avonte Maddox. So what are the implications just in terms of, who's going to start with just his return?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a big boost for the Eagles' defense. Avonte Maddox is one of the better slot cornerbacks in the NFL. Obviously, they've really missed him. You can look at the cast of characters that they've had in the slot, which included Bradley Roby, Eli Ricks. We've seen Sidney Brown in there for early down stuff, and just kind of over the last few weeks, even more than just early down. So I think having some stability there is going to be really important for them. Avonte Maddox, I mean, it's a tough position, that nickel cornerback spot. You have to be kind of stout against the run, despite being a smaller player who also has to be capable in coverage. And we've seen Avonte Maddox be able to do that. Again, it'll give them some stability. I'd expect James Bradbury to be at one of the outside cornerback spots, and I'd expect Keely Ringo to continue to kind of hold down that spot on the other side. Obviously, Eli Ricks should be able to work in on both of those ends. Maybe if James Bradbury is struggling, I am curious to see if Eli Ricks could maybe get a bigger role if Bradbury continues to struggle. But I'm kind of expecting it to be Bradbury, Ringo, and Avonte Maddox when they're in nickel, with Sidney Brown kind of mixing in when they do those like big nickel or big dime looks.
Mm-hmm. Just as a reminder, cornerback Darius Slay is still out with a knee injury. It's going to be his 3rd straight week out. However, he continues to be optimistic about his potential to return in the near future. So he has not practiced yet, but we'll see if he returns this week or in the coming weeks. All right, let's see who else is playing. We've got left guard Landon Dickerson returning after dealing with a thumb injury, undergoing thumb surgery. He only missed last week against the Giants, so the Eagles are poised to have their entire starting offensive line, which has not always been a guarantee this season. So that's a big boost for the Eagles offense. Inside linebacker Nicholas Morrow is also active after dealing with an abdomen injury, which he caused him to miss last week's game against the Giants. Inside linebacker Zach Cunningham, however, is still inactive, and he's missed the last couple of games with a knee injury. He was a limited participant in practice all week, but he was downgraded to doubtful yesterday. So no Zach Cunningham. With that in mind, EJ, who do you expect to see start today?
Yeah, I'd expect it to be Nicholas Morrow and then probably Shaq Leonard, if I had to guess. I think Shaq Leonard has actually looked, intriguing. I think you can tell he's not the player he once was. I think the back injuries have kind of robbed him of some of the athleticism and the explosiveness that you saw that made him one of the best linebackers in the NFL. But I think he's actually like an ideal fit in this defense because, he's still got the high-speed processor up here. He's able to diagnose information really quickly and kind of react quickly, just with the mental side of the game. I think we've seen the Eagles with a lot of inexperienced linebackers and, kind of in the wrong spot. With him, he's going to be in the right spot as long as he can get there. So I think having a smart, cerebral player like him is actually, I thought he played pretty well against the Giants. With that in mind. So, like I said, I'd expect it to be Morrow and Shaq Leonard at those linebacker spots. Maybe you see some Ben Van Sumer in. I thought he had some juice in energy. But yeah, I definitely think, again, the linebacker kind of surprised me against the Giants. I thought they played pretty well.
Mm-hmm. Also, someone else we want to make sure that we hit on the rest of this here. Tight end Albert Okwuegbunam is not playing because he has been added to injured reserve after popping up on the injury report Friday with a hamstring injury, just conveniently in time for Avonte Maddox to return from injured reserve. So keep just something to think about there. And then offensive lineman Tyler Steen is inactive. Defensive tackle Marlon Tuipulotu is also inactive. And which means that running back Rashad Penny is active for the first time in quite some time. How much of him, all four running backs are active today. How much of Penny do you realistically expect to see in today's game?
Yeah, it's hard to say like how much we're going to see, and probably not a ton, but I do think it's interesting. I think it makes sense. Like, these next two games, like the Eagles obviously have a lot of stakes for the next two games. They can't completely, put this in cruise control because they have so many playoff stakes. The number 2 seed, obviously, the Cowboys win kind of help them in their pursuit of the number 2 seed. They control their own destiny with that, and they still have a chance at the number 1 seed as well. So I think, that said, they can kind of start to look forward a little bit more and maybe try to get a little bit of the workload off of DeAndre Swift if this game isn't close in the second half or in the fourth quarter. So I think you could see Penny a lot if this game goes, in a way where the Eagles can kind of protect the lead and run the ball a lot. I think, getting some carries away or, getting DeAndre Swift a break if you could in the second half with Rashad Penny, I think it makes a lot of sense.
All right, we'll see what happens. All right, let's transition into our latest headlines segment. I think the biggest headline that has dominated this week is the fact that former Eagles defensive coordinator Jonathan Gannon and her current head coach of the Arizona Cardinals, Jonathan Gannon, is returning to the Lincoln Financial Field for the first time in quite some time, since he was defensive coordinator of the Philadelphia Eagles. And my guess is that he will be met with a little bit of maybe not so much love here by the local fan base. He is a little bit of a polarizing figure in Philly. He secretly and illegally interviewed for the Cardinals gig before the Super Bowl, leaving a little bit of a sour taste in Eagles fans' mouth. Now, as the head coach of the Cardinals, he has the second worst record in the league at 3-12, worst defense in the league in terms of EPA and in DVOA. But even though the Cardinals are out of a playoff spot, EJ, how big of a game is this for Gannon and his team?
Yeah, I mean, I think even he would admit if, maybe you have to give him the truth serum, but I think he would acknowledge that this is a big game for him. I think, he's made it clear that he is aware of the perception of him in the city. He's told stories that may or may not have actually been true about how the media felt about him while he was here and how the fans felt about him while he was here. So I definitely think this will be an important game. I'm sure he will hear some boos, not as benevolent as Jimmy Kempski was over my left shoulder, a few minutes ago. Probably not going to be that type of reception for Jonathan Gannon. But yeah, I do think this will be an important game for him. And I think it's going to be a really interesting game. Nick Sirianni mentioned earlier this week that, he knows them as well. Like the Eagles are obviously very familiar with, Jonathan Gannon, the scheme that he runs and the things that he prioritizes. But that goes the other way, too. You've got Jonathan Gannon is very familiar with what the Eagles want to do on offense. So definitely going to be an interesting matchup for those reasons. Nick kind of compared it to a division game because of that familiarity. But yeah, I definitely think this is going to be an important game for him. I think that, especially when you're at this point in the season for the Cardinals where they don't have that much to play for, this game is like got that personal edge to it. So I definitely think it'll be interesting.
Even though Gannon might be a polarizing figure, if you will, he did lead a very successful Eagles defense last season. And since his departure, the Eagles defense has not been the same. And obviously, it has been in quite some turmoil over the last few weeks with defensive coordinator in name only, I would say at this point, Sean Desai being stripped of his play calling duties and Matt Patricia taking over. He's going now into his third game calling the Eagles defense. The Eagles defense this season has had a really hard time, especially in situational football. They are 30th in the league in third down conversions, 30th in the red zone, 25th just in points allowed in general, which are all pretty substantial drop-offs from last season. But at the same time, you look at last season, you look at this season, there has been some major change in personnel across the board. How much of the blame for the defensive shortcomings do you pin on Gannon's departure versus just the fact that this is a new year, new season, different circumstances?
Well, I certainly think the circumstances around his departure, I called it a clumsy departure in my story in the or today's Inquirer. And I do think that it had some impact. I mean, the Eagles had Vic Fangio in their building throughout the postseason run. I would imagine that they hired Sean Desai, a Vic Fangio disciple. I would imagine that if they knew that Jonathan Gannon was leaving a little bit earlier, they probably would have tried to retain Vic Fangio. And I do think this Eagles defense would look different with Vic Fangio. He's the author of this scheme that is very popular throughout the league, and it's two high safety shells. It's kind of like being multiple up front. There's a lot of dynamics that a lot of defenses are picking up from Fangio. Having the original author of that defense would have been probably better than somebody like Sean Desai, who is trying to kind of rebuild that without the originator for help there. So definitely think the Eagles defense could have benefited from Fangio's presence, but at the same time, you mentioned that there are a lot of factors at play here. The Eagles' schedule is a lot harder. They had significant personnel turnover. They lost 5 starters on defense and a few key contributors from last year's defense, and they just don't have the continuity that they had last year. That was something I wrote about in my Sunday story. Just like last year they had all of their Week 1 starters available for the Super Bowl. Avonte Maddox missed some time, but he was really one of the only defensive players to miss a significant amount of time during that season. They had continuity at linebacker and at safety, and those guys are playing well above what you would expect from them. A lot of those guys had one of the best years of their career. This year, that has not been the case. They've been rotating guys at linebacker, rotating guys at quarterback, rotating guys at safety all season. Even before the injuries really required them to do that, they were doing that just because they were trying to figure out who they wanted on the field. So definitely just been personnel-wise a big difference. Opponent quality of opponent-wise is very different, but I also think you can acknowledge the fact that the Eagles' plan to replace Jonathan Gannon would have probably been a lot different had he handled the interview process with the Cardinals differently.
Highly recommend checking out EJ's story either in today's Inquirer if you got the physical copy over on Inquirer.com. Definitely worth a read. One of Gannon's tenets defensively that the Eagles are now very well acquainted with because they spent some time with him, obviously, is limiting explosive plays. That said, the Eagles this season have not been so great at generating them. They've only got 47 passes this season of over 20 yards, which is ranked number 12 in the league. And then they've only got 10 runs for over 20 yards, which is pretty, I think that's pretty shocking, I guess. Number 7th in the league. They're tied in that spot. And those are all drop-offs from last year, especially if you can think about the Eagles' explosive passing game last year was so strong. They were ranked number 2 overall in the league with 63 by the end of the season. What is the key to getting the offense going in this game, knowing that potentially Gannon's going to try to take away as many of those explosive plays as possible?
Yeah, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves for the predictions and, our player picks, because I think we're going to talk about this a good amount, but I think it is going to be not chasing those explosives. I mean, this Cardinals run defense, if Eagles fans will find this familiar, the Jonathan Gannon-led defense, the Cardinals defense led by Jonathan Gannon struggles against the run. I don't think they prioritize run defense. I don't think they are very effective against the run. I mean, they're the worst team in terms of DVOA against the run. They just gave up 215 rushing yards to the Bears. So I definitely think that that's going to be a key for the Eagles, is being able to kind of stay on schedule. Brian Johnson talked earlier this week about, playing for a third down versus playing for a first down on early downs. I think this is the type of game you can kind of play for a third down and third and manageable. You want to get ahead of the sticks. You want to be able to run the ball effectively. I think they're going to be able to get explosive runs against this team too. So I definitely think not chasing explosives. We've seen the Eagles do that. I remember against the Seahawks, especially. The Seahawks were kind of daring them to just take what was underneath and run the football with a lot of too high shells, which isn't really what Seattle does a lot of. And the Eagles just were very insistent on taking shots to the sideline. I don't think that will work against this Cardinals team. That's the one thing that they're going to protect, is the deep shots along the sideline. So I think we're going to have to see a creative game plan for the Eagles offense, something maybe we haven't seen as much. And I think running the ball is going to be really important against this team.
All right. Well, DeAndre Swift just 12 yards away from 1,000 rushing yards. The first time in his career he will reach that milestone. So we'll see exactly what the Eagles offense decides to do against Gannon's defense. All right. Let's transition into the fan zone, the best zone. So thank you all for your questions and your comments throughout the week. Just quickly over on Facebook, Louise is watching from Connecticut. Thank you so much, Louise, for tuning in. We really appreciate that. Let's start with this comment here from L Power. They say that the defensive line lost a couple good players. They had a 7 to 8 man rotation last season. Now they've barely got 4 players. They are playing more reps. Will be one of their reasons for a quick exit from the playoffs. There's no denying that the Eagles, especially in Javon Hargrave, lost a really talented pass interior lineman, a talented pass rusher. Who's now on a part of a very strong defensive front over with the 49ers. When you think about who they lost and who they gained, how much of a, I guess, difference is there this season with the defensive line, and just how much do you think some of their recent struggles and especially affecting the quarterback impacted by some of those losses?
Yeah, I mean, this Eagles defense, I've said it a lot on this show. This Eagles defense is built for the pass rush to impact games and kind of bail out the rest of the personnel. They're top or they're front heavy, you could call them, in terms of the investment that they have put in through the draft, and also in just paying these guys and making sure that they have a deep rotation. I do think that the rotation has gotten a little bit more shallow than we've seen in years past. They don't go really 4 deep on the edge like they used to. Nolan Smith's role is kind of limited in that regard. But yeah, I mean, I agree with the commenter that like they're going to have to impact the quarterback. The pass rush is going to have to impact the quarterback for them to do what they want to do in the playoffs. We saw what they did against the 49ers last year, where like Hassan Reddick completely wrecks the game, and I think that's the formula for this team. And in the playoffs, that's a formula for almost every team. You don't see teams that don't have a pass rush make it very far in the postseason very often. You think back to the Chiefs Tampa Bay Buccaneers Super Bowl, where they could really rush Patrick Mahomes and kind of take him out of his element. It's the way you neutralize the elite quarterbacks, and that's what you usually see in the playoffs. So, what's afflicting the Eagles pass rush? I think it's a lot of different things, obviously. I mean, I think the fact that the coverage hasn't held up like it did last year is a big part of it. Josh Sweat, I talked to him this week. He said this is the best rush year he's ever had, but he's only got half of the sack production that he had last year with 2 games remaining. And why is that? It's because, and again, he's got more pressures this year than he did last year. The pressures aren't resulting in sacks. There's a lot of things that have to go right for you to get a sack. And I think a lot of it is the coverage has to hold up on the back end. And you kind of need rushers to kind of complement each other. Quarterbacks can't just be flushed out of the pocket. Edge rushers are specifically affected by that. If you have a rush on one end, but the rest of the rush doesn't get home, the quarterback just flushes out of the pocket. So I think there's a lot of different things that are kind of impacting the pass rush, but the bottom line is that they have not been as effective as they were last year. And even if you throw last year out, it's maybe not fair to really compare them to last year. They're not effective by the league standards. They're middle of the pack in sack production. They're right on the fringes of the top 10 in pressure rate. They're high in pressures because they've seen a lot of passing plays, but the rate at which they get pressure is not quite the same. So, I think that that's definitely impacting them as Mike Silsky runs away from us instead of trying to give us some insight on the pass rush. But yeah, I think that that's definitely a big part of it, and I think it's something they need to reverse in time for the postseason.
Mm-hmm. All right, a thoughtful comment there. We appreciate your insight or your thoughts. And let's take a question here from Lobster. The coaches and players certainly have to be awake now after all their struggles and overconfidence. You would certainly think, just based on, I don't know, the kind of the conversations around the team, but also some of the comments from the team themselves, that like this isn't an 11-4 team. You'd think this team is 4-11 or something like that. But how much do you think that some of their recent struggles, whether the losses or even a really close win over the New York Giants last week, how much do you think that could kind of be a galvanizing thing as the Eagles look to finish the season out on a high note and into the playoffs?
Yeah, I definitely think hearing from some of the receivers and some of the players on offense, especially Devontae Smith, like I think they know that they're not playing well enough right now, and time is running out for them to figure this out. The turnover differential, is really kind of a concern going into the playoffs, and the point differential, the fact that they aren't able to kind of play a complete game, have the 4 consecutive quarters of good complementary football. I think that I think this team could really use that going into the playoffs, knowing that they can do it, even though like there are going to be valid questions about this team against elite teams going into the playoffs, no matter what happens, based off of how the season has gone. But even just getting like a convincing win in the next 2 weeks, I think would go a long way toward at least calming that down. You mentioned like you have players who talk about well, winning in this league is hard and a win is a win. But you can see, like, actions speak louder than words. Some of the coaching changes, and again, some of just like the changes, the practice changes, and the way that some players have talked about the way that they're playing right now, that this team is a little tense. This team is a little bit kind of needing that type of, like like you said, galvanizing win or galvanizing performance. So I definitely think that again, the time is running out. They're going to need to be able to do that either today or next week. But I do think it would go a long way going into the playoffs.
All right, Lobster, thank you very much for your comment. We appreciate it. And thank you all for your comments, your questions, as always. And of course, if you are over later on inquire.com/Eagles Game Day, we'll be taking more of your questions, your thoughts over there. So if we weren't able to answer your question or comment today, we will at least manually hope to get to some of them as well. All right, let's transition into our predictions segment. We're going to look into the future a little bit and see if we can predict the Eagles' final score of this game. So for that, as always, we welcome in Inquirer Eagles reporter Jeff McLean to give us his prediction and his matchup to watch. Jeff, it is wonderful to see you as always. What matchup will you be zeroing in on in today's game?
Well, I think we got to look at the Cardinals' run defense, which is pretty bad statistically. And if you watch the film, this is a unit that doesn't have much up front. Some of the names on the line, I don't know, Kevin Strong, Roy Lopez, the linebacker spot, Zaven Collins. I mean, these are not household names. And look, I'm not trying to disparage these players. They're in the NFL, but this is not the unit that they started the season with. And you can see that and how it's played out over the season for them in terms of their run defense. They're 32nd in yards per game, 30th in rushing yards allowed per carry, 32nd in rushing first downs allowed per game. The advanced statistics say the same thing in terms of DVOA. They're 31st, EPA per rush. They're 29th. And, the Eagles' run defense has been stronger. His run offense has been stronger the last few weeks. I think you see them kind of working in some different looks, a little misdirection, which sets up other runs. We saw some of the pistol last week, so a little more play action. So they're trying their best to mix things up, and it'll be interesting to see whether Rashad Penny gets some carries. Yes, Rashad Penny, who's been inactive for quite a while, and injuries may have played a role in that at other positions as to why he's active, but maybe he's the type of running back that they feel can really get yards against this Cardinals defense. But, I would expect DeAndre Swift. He's 12 yards from hitting that 1,000 yard mark for his career, first time in his career, and he can do so in 16 games. And that would be quite an accomplishment for him. I mean, recall just the first week when he was barely got any touches, and now all of a sudden, going into the year, I don't think a lot of people thought that he'd get as many carries just based upon his previous history. But Swift has been good. The run offense has been better. All that being said, before I finish here, the Cardinals' pass defense isn't good either, and the Eagles can't fall victim to what they may hear from the run the ball crowd here at the link. Yes, it's important to do so, but you have matchups advantages on the outside with A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and they need chunk yards. This is an offense that over the last month or so has not gotten as many chunk yard plays as they are equipped to get and that they've normally have gotten. So it'll be interesting to see how Nick Sirianni and Brian Johnson approach the play calling. But yeah, there's certainly an argument to be made to run just a little more than maybe they have in the past.
With all that in mind about this Cardinals defense, Jeff, what is your final score prediction for today's game?
Yeah, I have the Eagles winning pretty handily, 30-20. Last week I had them winning in a blowout, and quite frankly, I thought it would have been a blowout if it wasn't for three kind of fluky plays. Look, again, at this point in the season, this is kind of characteristic of the Eagles, the mistakes and how they have performed week in and week out. But this Cardinals team is really beat up in terms of injuries, and they just don't have a lot of talent. I know Kyler Murray can give you fits, and they have a really good running back in James Conner. So maybe they can keep it tight, and if they control the ball into the fourth quarter and it's close, who knows, maybe anything can happen. But this looks like an Eagles victory to me.
Mm-hmm. All right, Jeff. Well, thank you so much for your insight. EJ, now I'd like to hear from you. What is your final score prediction for today's game?
Yeah, I see it a lot of the same way that Jeff does. I had the Eagles winning 27-21. I do think that this Cardinals offense will be able to put up some points against the Eagles defense. I'm not super convinced after the last 2 games that the Eagles defense has cured all that ails them. I think that there could be moments where the Cardinals can get some explosive plays and kind of be. I mean, again, Kyler Murray is the best quarterback that they've faced since Matt Patricia took over. I think that he could give them some issues. I know he's not quite back to 100%. After the ACL, doesn't quite look like himself, the guy he was last year. But still, I do think that the Cardinals should be able to have some production. But I think the Eagles will be able to kind of keep pace in this game and kind of control the game. I want to mention like Jalen Hurts is very familiar playing against Jonathan Gannon defense. I know that goes both ways, but that familiarity kind of, it's like, okay, well, which group is more talented? And I think the Eagles offense has the clear talent advantage. So I think they're going to be able to run the ball again, control the game. And I think they're going to be able to dial up plays when they need to kind of, get those explosives, those chunk plays that Jeff mentioned. So I have it a little bit closer just because, I just haven't seen the Eagles put teams away this year, but I think they should still be able to win this game with a, relative easily controlling the game, like I mentioned earlier.
I've got a bit of a bigger margin, and Mike McLaughlin might have the biggest margin of all of us over on Facebook. He says 35-14 Eagles. That's a pretty big margin there, and certainly not a margin that we've seen any of this season. But I've got 31-17 Eagles today. I don't think that this is going to be a close game. I really do feel like at this point in the season, and I think Jeff made mention of this too, is that the Eagles' worst and biggest enemy at times is themselves, and they make a lot of mistakes. Penalties, a couple of turnovers that really bit them last week against the Giants. I think at some point, especially with the turnovers and some of the close penalties, I think some of that will regress to the mean. But at the end of the day, I do think that the Eagles team is just better on paper across the board. Mistakes aside, situational football issues aside, because there certainly are a lot of those, especially on defense. I still think that they have enough to beat this Cardinals team pretty handily. But we'll see if if my prediction is correct about some of those mistakes, especially the more fluky things regressing into the mean at some point. But all right, we're going to move it on. Thank you very much, Jeff, for joining us. Happy New Year, and we will see you in the new year.
Happy New Year, Jeff.
Thanks for having me. Happy New Year.
All right, EJ, let's move on to our player picks. We've discussed plenty of players and matchups and everything throughout the show. However, if you had to pick one player that you're going to key in on in today's game, who's it going to be?
I want to pull our listeners and our readers also to behind the curtain a little bit here. I was going to go with DeAndre Swift, but I was a little late getting to the script, and now I got to kind of pivot. So I'm going to go AJ Brown. I'm going to say that the Eagles are going to be running the ball so well that AJ Brown's going to start getting one-on-one matchups on the outside without safety help, and he's going to make the Cardinals pay. Do I actually believe that that's going to happen? Maybe we'll see. But I do think it's also a good opportunity to mention that AJ Brown's 103 receiving yards away from breaking his record from last year, a franchise record in receiving yards. So I think that's it's in play today. I think you could definitely do it. And I think also like maybe this is a red zone game for AJ Brown where the yardage is a little bit limited, but there's a touchdown or two. Obviously he's been in the news this week. I think it might be a little overblown. I don't really know if we really know what's going on with AJ Brown yet, but I think that we've seen enough from him production wise to expect that he's going to play well. That's not really going to impact the way that he is on game day. So yeah, I'm going to go AJ Brown, and I'm going to be a good teammate here. And as my host may have mentioned before the show, come up with an original idea.
It was a low blow of me. I shouldn't have said that. And to your credit, AJ Brown was going to be my second choice, but I got my first choice because I was the first in the script this week.
Early bird gets the worm. Yeah, it's good.
That is true. As to not duplicate, so we would have multiple things to talk about. I don't think necessarily duplicating is a bad thing. And now that you know that EJ would have chosen this player, perhaps you get the picture now. But anyway, I'm going with running back DeAndre Swift as my player to watch. As we already mentioned earlier in the show, he is just 12 yards away from reaching 1,000 rushing yards for the first time in his career. A pretty substantial milestone, as Jeff mentioned, for someone who we weren't really sure exactly how many touches and yards as a result he would get this year. And clearly he's gotten quite a few, even though at times it seems like in this offense he has been underutilized. But anyway, that's all. We'll see exactly what happens, especially with the Cardinals coming off of last week allowing 250 rushing yards against the Chicago Bears in their loss to the Bears. So that is not a recipe for success for the Cardinals, and we'll see if DeAndre Swift is able to take advantage of that. He's also coming off of one of his most productive games of the season against the Giants when he put up 92 rushing yards on 20 carries. He also had a touchdown in that game. He almost had 2 touchdowns, but he had to go down at the 1-yard line, and then from there,
the brotherly shove takes over. Yeah.
Yep.
I have a question for you, Olivia, and this is not on the script, so I apologize. But I need your reaction to Kyler Murray showing up to the game in a Sidney Crosby jersey. I need to know what the former Flyers beat reporter thinks about that decision.
Yeah, I think it's great. Oh, it's awesome. I love that stuff. I don't know. I think it's all pretty. I mean, it's fun. It's great. I love a little villain moment. I think it's the Flyers have a better record than the Penguins this year by quite a bit. The Penguins are not the dominant force that they once were, but man, Sidney Crosby still got it. he still beats up on the Flyers. It seems like he always has at least a goal per game when he plays the Flyers lately, even when the Penguins lose those games. But that all said, yeah, as much as Flyers fans, Philly fans don't like Sidney Crosby, I get it. He is a very, very talented, successful player. And I think it's very good there by Kyler Murray having a little bit of fun on game day. So we'll see if that gives him any juice going into this game. All right, everybody, that is going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for joining us, Inquire Live at Gameday Central. Remember, you can stick around, inquire.com/Eagles Gameday, and you can be a part of our conversation all game long. I'll be over there. I know the rest of our colleagues will be over there as well, chatting with you in real time from the press box throughout the game. So we look forward to seeing you there.
Yeah, and also make sure to stay up to date on all of our Inquire Sports coverage by subscribing to our Sports Daily newsletter. You'll see our most recent articles along with other Phillies, Sixers, and college sports coverage. A lot of the articles referenced throughout the segment will be there.
And you can keep up with Philly's most seasoned beat reporter on Uncovering the Birds with Jeff McLean. A new episode dropped pretty recently, so you can check that out wherever you listen to your podcast, or you can go to inquire.com/podcasts. That's all for today, everyone. Thank you so much again for tuning in to Game Day Central. Happy New Year, and we will see you in 2024.
Happy New Year, everybody.